is quickly approaching, if it's not already here yet by the time this video posts. Regardless, I am so excited. Halloween has always been one of my favorite holidays. To celebrate, I thought it'd be fun to revisit a cake that I made for Halloween way back in 2018 that is still one of my favorites. To get started, I jumped on my iPad to use Procreate to come up with a design for my cake. Now, I know this is going to cause some drama in the comments section, but I have never personally liked candy corn. I just don't get it. Every year Halloween comes around, the candy corn comes out, and I'm just left wondering, who the hell eats this crap? Because it's awful. It tastes like waxy sugar cubes. I just don't get it. Anyway, that is how the design for this cake came about. I mentally got an image of a candy corn monster who enjoys eating candy corn. So I guess that technically makes him a candy corn cannibal, but I settled on naming him the Candy Critter. To kick this cake build off, I started with what would become the Candy Critter's candy basket. I sculpted it out of Rice Krispie treats. I made a thick cylinder with a rounded bottom to get the basic shape that I needed. From there, I made a round mound that would eventually be added to the top of the basket. You'll see why I did this in a second. Once I had all my pieces carved for the basket, I covered them with frosting to prep them for the fondant, and I set them aside. I rolled out some orange fondant and draped it over the larger of the two basket pieces. I used a fondant smoother to help smooth and secure the fondant to the top, then slowly worked my way around, pulling the folds, smoothing down the fondant, while cutting away the excess. Flipping the basket over, I covered the top with more frosting, then added the rounded mound we made earlier. With the mound in place, more orange fondant was added, smoothed, and trimmed. Adding a little water around the top edge of the basket, I added a band of fondant to hide the seams while giving the basket a lip. From there, the basket needed a face. Then I took some candy corn, leaving some pieces whole while cutting others in half. I used water to attach the face to the bucket, and I used water to attach the pieces of candy corn to the mound on top. With the bucket complete, I moved on to the shoes. I carved two basic shoe shapes, covered them with frosting, then began the decorating process by covering the top of the shoes with white fondant and the bottom of the shoes with black fondant. From there, I added a tongue to the shoe. I used a template to cut out all the black details needed to create the look of saddle shoes, and glued everything in place with water. Next were the eyelets for the shoes. I made them using frosting tips, then secured them in place with water. To hide where the leg of my critter and the shoe would meet later, I made a cord of white fondant to create a lip or top edge to the shoe that'd wrap around the critter's ankle. From there, a black strip of fondant was added around the bottom of the shoe to tie everything together. Then it was time for the laces. I rolled out cords of orange fondant and cut them down into smaller pieces. This took a lot more thinking than I care to admit as I crisscrossed the cords between the eyelets. I was really trying to make them look realistic or at least believable. Once that was done, 2 orange loops were added with a middle band to create a bow, along with 2 cords to create the ends of the laces. I thought the laces would be a fun way to bring the color of the critter into the shoes. With the bucket and shoes done, I turned my attention to making the Candy Critter's booty. I decided to make the base of the candy corn out of a few layers of Rice Krispie treats since I wanted it to be somewhat rounded to get that candy corn shape. To secure the cake to the cake board, I added frosting to the bottom of the base and placed it to the back of the board and centered it. Then I frosted the top of the base, getting it ready for my first layer of cake. I believe I baked 3 9-inch round cakes for this, and I cut them down into 3 pieces to avoid waste. For the first layer, I used 2 outer edge cake pieces, gluing them together in the middle with frosting. Then I leveled them and added an icing dam. The icing dam is just a thicker mix of frosting used to keep the standard softer mix from squishing out as the weight of each new layer is added on top. If you don't do the dam, the frosting will squish out and it will affect the appearance of the fondant as the cake settles. For the second layer, I added a solid center cut of cake. I figured if I alternated between a layer made up of 2 pieces and layers made up of 1 piece, it helped the overall stability of the cake. From there, I added 5 wooden dowels. Dowels are used to support the weight that will be added to the cake with each new layer, and they help stabilize it. With the dowels in place, I added a layer of frosting, skipping the icing dam since I knew the dowels would be holding up a cake board. The cake board was cut down to fit the shape of the cake. When doing this, you want it to be slightly smaller than the actual cake layer. Now it was just a matter of repeating the same process. Frosting was added to the cake board to make the 3rd layer of cake stick in place. The cake layer was trimmed down. An icing dam was added, which was then filled with frosting. A 4th layer of cake was added and trimmed down. Dowels were added for support. The top of the cake layer was frosted, and a new cake board was added. This layering process continued until the candy corn shape I was looking for was complete. Once the layering and carving was complete, I went in with a crumb coat of frosting. A crumb coat is just a very thin layer of frosting that locks the crumbs down before moving on to your final, thicker, smoother layer of frosting. To cover the candy critter's body, I needed yellow, orange, and white fondant. This just might have been the worst part of the entire process because the cake was so big and the fondant had to be wrapped around such an odd shape. Trying to cover the shape led to a lot of really ugly seams, especially in that orange band of fondant. So I intentionally placed the seams on the front of the critter where I felt they'd be easier to hide. With the body covered, it was time to move on to those facial features. I filled the inside of the mouth with black fondant and gave the critter white fondant, chiclet-looking teeth. Then I used cords of orange fondant to make the lips. I gave the critter big, circular eyes made out of white and black fondant with orange eyelids. Then moved on to sculpting a nose out of Rice Krispie treats and fondant. I decided sculpting it would be better than using a lump of fondant or gum paste since the final sculpt would be a lot lighter and less likely to fall off. While I was sculpting the nose, I noticed that it looked as though the fondant on the critter was slowly starting to slip. This was my first hard lesson when it came to working with fondant and humidity. The two do not mix well at all. You can just slightly see the fondant rippling in the face due to the slipping. There was nothing I could do about it. I made the critter's tongue out of 2 pieces of pink fondant that I sandwiched floral wire between. I wanted the tongue to stick out of the mouth, so I needed the wire to support the weight of the tongue, and I needed it to secure the tongue into the critter's mouth. Now for the arms. I rolled out 2 thick cords of white fondant and snaked wire through the center of the fondant cords. The wire helped make the arms posable, supported the weight of the fondant, and helped secure the arms to the cake. I also added a few more supports. The biggest one I added was a wooden dowel that I hammered down into the Rice Krispie bottom of the cake through the mouth. This helped secure the arm and avoided adding more weight to the face. Adding toothpick supports to the face and lips, I added the fondant hands. I cleaned up where the arms met the hands and the body with small cords of fondant. For the legs, I sculpted 2 Rice Krispie cylinders that narrowed as they got to the ankles. They were frosted, covered with yellow fondant, then attached to the shoes with a toothpick. From there, a toothpick was used to attach the leg to the body of the candy critter, and I poked flour nails through the cake board into the shoes to secure them to the cake board. Then I used yellow cords of fondant to clean up the edges where the critter's leg and body meet. Now for the final touches. I went in fixing and hiding any visible seams. Then I added candy corn to the critter's mouth, making it look as though he's shoveling the nasty wannabe candy into his face. Finally, I placed pieces of candy corn all around him on the board. With that, he is complete. What do you think? Do you love him? Do you hate him? I personally love him. It's been years since I've made this cake, but it is still hands down my favorite. I would love to hear what you think of my candy critter in the comments below. And if you'd like to see me make more cakes, let me know. I do have a few ideas in mind for Christmas. One's kind of like Charlie Brown and the other one's kind of Grinchy. Happy to share those if you're interested. That's all for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate all of your support.